It's one of the most dramatic periods in the whole of history. But not only was it a time of great sort of heroes and the fantastical that happened almost every year, and by which I'm talking about the first half of the 15th century, but also it was a hinge in history. It was a time of enormous change, and it was the end of the Roman Empire. It was the end of the old period of history, as I term it, and it was the beginning of the new age of history. And it all happened around the Fall of Constantinople in halfway through the 15th century, which was a huge and cataclysmic event, shook Europe to its foundations, forced Europe to seek new trade routes to the east and by accident to the west. And it created a new front line against Islam that is still with us today. And so I felt that not only was it a time of intense drama, which lends itself obviously for fiction, but also it was a time that has amazing resonance to some of the biggest issues that challenge us today. A period when Western Europe had been, for want of a better phrase, in the dark to the grey period, the Dark Ages to the Grey Ages, which culminated in the Renaissance and this massive new sort of not just artistic but also academic flowering, but also scientific flowering. And it was the beginning of an age where Europe harnessed all of those elements in order to create world empire that then ended up in the age of, well, began with the age of discovery and ended up with the age of colonialism, the Enlightenment, and the Western dominance that we really have enjoyed right up until now, when we see the East coming back. So I think it was a time when history changed gear. I think it was a time when, because of some of the forces that were trammelled by the halt of Islam at the gates of Constantinople, because the gates were essentially broken down, it unleashed all sorts of forces that are still with us now. I wanted to explore, I was interested in the military side, so I was interested in how the remnants of a once very powerful empire, but still with enormous sort of diplomatic and moral sway in the world, confronts a much, much bigger force, Islamic force, a much more religious-based force, and how it confronts it really as the last bastion of the West. And I was also fascinated by the theme of, the commercial theme, the theme of trade, which, as always in history, really informed what went on. So what you had at that time was a Silk Road that was still very much in place and ending up in Constantinople, which had been the cause of its wealth over the centuries. And Venice, which was the commercial centre of Europe, which very much fed off trade with the East through the land route, but to a lesser extent through the sea route through to Alexandria. And how the fall of Constantinople essentially put an end to that land trade route and forced the West to then start discovering new sea routes, and in particular the Portuguese finding them through round the bottom of Africa through to the east. They never called themselves Byzantine. They saw themselves very much as Roman. And so when people talk about the end of the Roman Empire, as Gibbon famously said that it happened in 472, I don't see that at all. I think the Roman Empire went on until 1453, the fall of Constantinople. And what happened in 472 was that the Western Roman Empire, the western half, collapsed, and the eastern half very much went on for another 1,000 years. So the Byzantines essentially saw themselves as Roman. Having said that, really from the time of Justinian, who was one of their great early Byzantine emperors, they spoke Greek, so they'd reverted to what perhaps they were before the Roman Empire. And also in terms of trade, and we always come back to trade in these things, I mean, the Western Roman Empire had very much centred itself on the Mediterranean trade. It was a Mediterranean empire. I mean, it was as important in North Africa as it was in southern France and Spain. I mean, actually Britain was a bit of an irrelevance at that time. It was an odd province for them to have had because it didn't have huge trading potential. So you had that sort of, if you like, centre of trade in the Western Roman Empire that then collapsed after 472. And then you had the eastern side, which traded much more with the East, and therefore, not only for economic reasons, looked to the East, but also for cultural reasons. I mean, their go-between with the East was much, much greater than it was with the Western Empire. And that meant that in the all-important area of religion, their form of Christianity was increasingly mystical. It was increasingly at odds with what the Western Church was seeking to do. And this led to the great schism between the Western Church and the Eastern Church of 1054. And it led to, in my view, the decline of the Byzantine Empire as much because of the threat of Islam from the East, but as much as the jealousy, suspicion and contempt that they were held by the West, who were jealous of their wealth and also deeply suspicious of their version of Christianity, which they saw as being much more owing to the East than it was to the West. My latest book, which is By Blood Divided, I mean, I've written 4 now about that period, and the first 3 were set at the beginning of the 15th century. And the last one deals with this great event, which was the Fall of Constantinople. It's a love story. There's a triangle. There's a Venetian courtesan, and there is a sort of military figure from the Byzantine Empire, and also a very important general from the Ottoman side as well. And there's also they're not aware of it at the beginning, but they're also rivals to the greatest sort of trading empire in Europe for reasons that become apparent in the book. So first and foremost, it's a great, great story. I hope it's a fantastic story about love, about trade, about rivalry, about ambition, about heroism. But it's set against the drama of this extraordinary time when the most amazing people came to the fore and were prepared to sacrifice themselves on the walls of Constantinople in this cataclysmic siege, which still has to be seen as one of the great, great sieges of history.